First up, police in Thailand have arrested more anti-government activists. It's part of action against rallies that have been going on for the past month. At least 9 people were taken into custody over the past 24 hours, and they've now been released on bail. The protests are emerging as a serious challenge to Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, who is already having to deal with pandemic-induced economic woes. And in a moment, we'll go live to Sakthi Sorasambat in Bangkok. But first, a look at how events have unfolded.
The latest arrests target a popular rapper, a human rights lawyer and a veteran activist, among others. They are charged with breaching internal security laws and defying an emergency coronavirus measure that bans public gatherings. It's been more than a month since mass student-led demonstrations erupted. Using the three-fingered salute inspired by the Hunger Games, hundreds of school children closed in on the education minister, jeering and heckling him as he came out to speak with them.
การแสดงสัญลักษณ์ไม่มีปัญหาครับว่าจะแสดงยังไงก็ได้ตราบใดที่เราอยู่ในขอบเขตนะครับเราไม่ได้ก้าวร้าวนะครับหนูไม่ได้เอา3นิ้วมาจิ้มตาพี่นี่ถ้าจิ้มตาอันนั้นมันก็เกิดเรื่องถูกไหมครับแต่ในขณะเดียวกันก็ต้องเปิดโอกาสให้คนที่อาจจะมองเห็นต่างเขาอาจจะไม่อยากโชว์3นิ้ว
Protesters have been demanding the resignation of Prayut Chan-o-cha's government and democratic reform. But they triggered even more controversy earlier this month when they expanded their agenda to criticize Thailand's monarchy, issuing a 10-point manifesto calling for its reform.
Well, let's bring in our correspondent, Sakthi Sorasambat in Bangkok. So, Sakthi, the 9 protesters who were arrested, they were released on bail just a short while ago. What are they accused of?
Well, Glenda, the list is pretty long, but the main point it all boils down to against all these 9 that have been arrested over the past 24 hours is sedition. Article 116 of the Criminal Code that says here and that it can be punished with up to 7 years. But there's also very interestingly, many of them have also been charged with violating a state of emergency because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The interesting point here is since at least the case that has been brought up here refers to a rally on July the 18th, the first big rally that has set up this series of anti-government protests. That was before the government has said that they will not use the state of emergency law against political protests, with the extension going on from August. So even though for later protests that have been happening this month, they might not be charged with violating this, they were still being charged with violations before that point. Now, all in all, the activists are still saying that this has nothing to do with COVID or with the pandemic whatsoever, that this is a suppression of dissent against the government of General Prayut Chan-o-cha.
Sakthi, are these arrests likely to have any impact on the growing protests, given they've largely been seen as a leaderless movement?
It can have an impact, but not quite the impact that the government might wish to. It could actually embolden the protesters to go on with their protests. Now, we have seen these protests going on for quite some time, for at least 1 month, not only on the streets of Bangkok, but also on campuses around the country. And even the school children, as we have seen earlier just a few minutes ago, are joining in the fray as well. So this is a huge challenge against the government, but not only against the government, but also against the whole political structure, including the demands for reform of the monarchy that is officially revered here in Thailand.
So saying that, how are authorities responding to protester demands of this, demanding a new constitution and, as you mentioned, the reform of the monarchy?
Well, it really depends who you talk to, but so far, overall, the response by the government, except with the arrest of all these activists, have been pretty tame. They have been saying that they are listening to the demands of the protesters, that they are trying to have constitutional amendments where there's a bipartisan agreement on both sides of the aisle, at least in principle, but not so much on the details. But however, government and coalition parties are saying, and especially also established parties and ultra-royalists, they are saying that any change to the royal institution, as I said, that is officially revered here in Thailand, is an absolute non-starter. However, the arrests of activists, which is, by the way, not the first time that we have seen over the past few weeks, that begs to differ. And as I said before, these arrests could escalate the protests even further going forward. And there will be more protests have already been announced, and with a big one next month in September.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll be keeping an eye on it for us. Thanks very much for that, Saksit Sayasombat, speaking to us from Bangkok.